The helicopter blades cut through thick morning mist as we approach a land that time forgot. Below us stretches an endless green carpet of rainforest, broken only by winding rivers that snake like silver ribbons toward distant mountains. This is Papua, the Indonesian half of New Guinea, where snow-capped peaks rise from steaming jungles, and Stone Age tribes still follow rules that would make your head spin. Most people think Indonesia is just Bali beaches and Jakarta traffic jams, but they're missing the wildest secret hiding in plain sight. Papua makes up nearly half of Indonesia's landmass, yet fewer tourists visit here in a year than hit Bali in a single weekend. Why? Because this isn't your typical backpacker destination. This is a place where tribal elders can have multiple wives, where pig tusks serve as currency, and where stepping into the wrong village without permission could land you in serious trouble. But here's the kicker. You can actually live here on just $500 a month if you know the rules. And trust me, there are rules you won't believe until you see them yourself. We're talking about customs so ancient and intense that modern Indonesia still struggles to understand them. So buckle up, because we're about to take you inside a world where smartphones exist alongside stone axes, and where surviving means learning traditions that predate written history by thousands of years. The morning sun breaks through the canopy as our helicopter touches down in Wamena, a small town nestled in the Balium Valley. The air hits you immediately, thin, crisp, and carrying scents you can't identify. Sweet smoke from cooking fires mingles with the earthy smell of wet jungle and something else, something primal that reminds you this place operates by different rules entirely. Children wearing traditional Koteka penis gourds run alongside kids in Manchester United jerseys, while their mothers carry smartphones in traditional string bags called noken that their grandmothers wove using techniques perfected over centuries. Papua sits like a sleeping giant at the eastern edge of Indonesia, sharing the island of New Guinea with Papua New Guinea to the east. While most of Indonesia bakes under tropical heat, Papua's geography reads like a fantasy novel. You've got coastal lowlands where crocodiles patrol muddy rivers, highlands where the temperature drops to near freezing, and in between, some of the most impenetrable jungle on Earth. The crown jewel is Puncak Jaya, Indonesia's highest peak at over 16,000 feet. Yes, you read that right. There are actual glaciers in Indonesia, and they're sitting right here in Papua's mountains. The Karstens Pyramid, as climbers call it, attracts mountaineers from around the world who come to tick off one of the 7 summits. But getting there requires navigating through territories controlled by tribes who've been here since before the pyramids were built. The landscape shifts dramatically every few miles in ways that would take geologists hours to explain. Coastal areas around Jayapura feature mangrove swamps where saltwater crocodiles grow to lengths that make Australian specimens look like pets. The Mamberamo River Basin contains wetlands so vast that Indonesian satellites have trouble mapping their exact boundaries. Moving inland, the terrain climbs through lowland rainforest where trees grow so tall that their canopies create separate ecosystems hundreds of feet above the ground. The central highlands rise like a spine through Papua's interior, creating climate zones that shift from tropical to temperate to alpine within a day's travel. Villages at 8,000 feet elevation experience temperature drops that require fires year-round, while settlements just 50 miles away never see temperatures below 80 degrees. This geographic diversity created the conditions for cultural diversity that makes Papua unique even within Indonesia's already complex ethnic landscape. The Dutch were the first Europeans to plant their flag here in the 1800s, but they quickly realized that claiming Papua on paper and actually controlling it were two very different things. The jungle swallowed their expeditions whole, and the highland tribes had zero interest in European rules. Dutch colonial reports from the period read like adventure novels, describing encounters with peoples whose technologies and social systems operated according to principles that European observers struggled to comprehend. When Indonesia gained independence, Papua became part of the package deal through a political process that most Papuans had no voice in. The Act of Free Choice in 1969 supposedly allowed Papuans to vote on joining Indonesia, but only about 1,000 hand-picked representatives participated, while Indonesian military forces maintained a visible presence throughout the process. Even today, 60 years later, the Indonesian government admits they don't fully control large chunks of their own territory. Flying over Papua's landscape, you understand why complete administrative control remains elusive. The Mamberamo River system alone drains an area larger than most European countries, winding through jungles so thick that satellite imagery can't penetrate the canopy. Roads exist mainly as wishful thinking on government maps, and some valleys remain completely cut off from the outside world except for occasional helicopter visits that depend entirely on weather conditions. This isn't just geographic isolation, it's cultural time travel. Anthropologists working in Papua's remote areas regularly encounter societies that developed sophisticated solutions to social coordination problems without ever developing written languages, permanent architecture, or metallurgy. These aren't primitive peoples stuck in the past. They're communities that chose different technological and social paths while maintaining cultures that prioritize sustainability and social cohesion over material accumulation. The transition zones between different ecological regions created the conditions for Papua's incredible cultural diversity. Over 200 distinct languages are spoken across Papua's various regions, representing language families that diverged thousands of years ago. Some of these languages have fewer than 100 speakers, while others, like Dani, are spoken by hundreds of thousands of people across vast highland regions. The morning ritual in a traditional Dani village starts before dawn, with the haunting sound of war cries echoing across the valley. These aren't performances for tourists. They're daily reminders that in Papua, tradition isn't something you put in a museum. It's how you survive. Take Yali, a village elder we met in the Central Highlands. At 63, he has 4 wives, owns 30 pigs, and has never used money in his entire life. His wealth is measured in pig tusks and cowrie shells, and his authority comes from mastering customs so complex that anthropologists spend decades trying to understand them. When Yali's grandson wants to marry, the family does not save for a wedding. They breed pigs for 3 years to pay the bride price. But don't mistake Yali for someone stuck in the past. He speaks 3 local languages plus Indonesian, serves as a mediator in disputes that affect multiple villages, and has successfully adapted traditional agricultural techniques to deal with changing weather patterns that scientists are just beginning to understand. His knowledge includes detailed understanding of soil conditions, water management, and crop rotation strategies that enable sustainable agriculture in environments where modern techniques often fail. The rules governing Papuan tribal life would make a lawyer's head explode. In Dani culture, a man proves his worth through elaborate gift exchanges that can take generations to complete. Marry into the wrong clan without proper negotiation, and you might find yourself banned from an entire valley. Insult someone's ancestors, and the debt follows your children for decades. These systems might sound arbitrary to outsiders, but they serve crucial functions in societies without written contracts, police forces, or court systems. The complex web of obligations and reciprocal relationships creates social insurance networks that guarantee assistance during emergencies, coordinate resource sharing during seasonal shortages, and maintain peace between groups that might otherwise compete violently for limited resources. Consider the traditional justice system that still operates in many highland areas. When someone commits a serious offense like theft or adultery, the resolution process involves extended negotiations between families that can take months to complete. Compensation might include pigs, shells, labor obligations, or even marriage arrangements that bind the offending family to the victims through ongoing relationships. This system prioritizes restoration over punishment and maintains social cohesion, rather than simply removing problematic individuals from the community. But it's not all ancient customs. Walk through Jayapura, Papua's capital, and you'll find internet cafes next to shops selling traditional penis gourds. Young Papuans scroll through Instagram while their grandparents discuss bride prices in currencies that predate the Roman Empire. The collision between old and new creates some seriously weird situations that reveal how cultural adaptation actually works in practice. Take Willem, a 25-year-old Papuan who works as a tour guide. He speaks 4 languages, has a university degree in environmental science, and runs a social media business promoting local culture to international audiences. His Instagram account showcases traditional dances and ceremonies, but he's also fluent in global environmental policy and uses his platform to advocate for indigenous land rights. But when his uncle died last year, Willem had to spend 3 months in the forest following traditional mourning rituals that forbid him from using any modern technology. No phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. Just him, the jungle, and customs his ancestors have followed for thousands of years. During those 3 months, Willem learned traditional skills that his university education never covered: how to identify edible plants by subtle variations in leaf patterns, how to predict weather changes from bird behavior, how to navigate through trackless forest using landmarks that most people would never notice. When he returned to his modern life, he found that this traditional knowledge enhanced rather than conflicted with his scientific training. The transition from village to town life hits different in Papua. In Jakarta or Bali, traditional culture is something you preserve and celebrate during special occasions. In Papua, it's a living, breathing system that still governs daily decisions about everything from business partnerships to marriage arrangements. When Indonesian migrants move to Papua, they often struggle to understand why business deals fall apart over seemingly minor cultural infractions, or why certain areas become completely off-limits during traditional ceremonies that might last for weeks. Understanding Papua's dual social system requires grasping how traditional and modern authority structures coexist without always coordinating effectively. Village elders might hold more practical power than government officials in remote areas, while traditional laws often take precedence over Indonesian legal codes in resolving local disputes. This creates situations where the same action might be legal according to Indonesian law, but prohibited by traditional custom, or vice versa. The economic implications of this dual system affect everything from land ownership to business relationships. Traditional land tenure systems recognize collective ownership patterns that Indonesian property law doesn't acknowledge, creating conflicts when outside investors want to develop mining or agricultural projects. Traditional trade relationships based on reciprocal obligations operate alongside cash-based markets in ways that can confuse outsiders who expect economic transactions to follow predictable commercial patterns. Women in traditional Papuan society hold more power than outsiders typically realize, but it comes with responsibilities that would exhaust most modern people. Papuan women manage the family's pig herds, oversee complex agricultural cycles, and serve as keepers of traditional knowledge that determines everything from when to plant crops to how to resolve disputes between families. The workday for a traditional Papuan woman starts at 4 in the morning with feeding and checking the pigs that represent her family as primary wealth. Pigs in Highland Papua aren't just livestock. They're savings accounts, status symbols, and social security all rolled into one. Each pig has a name, a known genealogy, and specific social functions that determine when it can be traded, eaten, or used in ceremonies. Managing a pig herd requires understanding complex breeding strategies, seasonal feeding cycles, and social protocols that govern pig exchanges between families. After tending the pigs, women head to the gardens that provide most of the family's daily nutrition. Sweet potato cultivation in Papua involves sophisticated agricultural techniques that maximize production while maintaining soil fertility in challenging mountain environments. Women maintain detailed knowledge of dozens of sweet potato varieties, each with specific growing requirements, nutritional properties, and cultural uses. The planting calendar coordinates with traditional ceremonies, weather predictions, and social obligations in ways that require women to balance multiple complex systems simultaneously. But this is not mindless drudgery. These women are making decisions that affect their entire community's survival. When to harvest sweet potatoes, which pigs to trade, how to navigate the intricate web of clan relationships that determine who your family can marry, do business with, or ask for help during emergencies. Elder women often serve as informal judges in disputes involving marriage arrangements, property boundaries, or ceremonial obligations. The responsibilities extend beyond immediate family management to include maintaining relationships with extended kin networks that might span multiple valleys. Women coordinate gift exchanges that maintain alliances between families, organize work parties for major agricultural tasks, and serve as information networks that keep communities informed about everything from weather conditions to political developments. Modern education and economic opportunities are creating new possibilities for Papuan women, while also generating tensions with traditional expectations. Young women who attend university or work in town often find themselves navigating between career aspirations and family obligations that require their presence during certain seasons or ceremonies. Some successfully blend both worlds, using modern skills to enhance traditional roles, while others face difficult choices between individual advancement and community responsibilities. The women's traditional clothing reflects both practical requirements and cultural identity in ways that outsiders often misunderstand. The grass skirts worn in highland areas aren't primitive fashion. They're sophisticated garments designed for specific climate conditions and work requirements, while expressing clan affiliations and social status through patterns and materials that communicate complex information to informed observers. Forget whatever you think you know about Papuan cuisine, because the reality is both simpler and more complex than you'd expect. The foundation of Highland diet is sweet potatoes, not as a side dish but as the main event for every meal. A single family might grow 20 different varieties of sweet potato, each with specific uses, growing seasons, and cultural significance that determines when and how they can be consumed. But calling it simple misses the sophisticated knowledge required to maintain this system. Highland Papuans have developed cultivation techniques that enable year-round production in mountain environments where most crops would fail. Terraced gardens climb impossibly steep hillsides using water management systems that prevent erosion while maintaining soil fertility. Crop rotation strategies incorporate dozens of plant species that provide nutrition, medicine, and materials for tools and construction. Sago palm starch serves as the primary carbohydrate in lowland areas, but preparing it requires knowledge passed down through generations and physical labor that would challenge most gym enthusiasts. The women pound the palm pith into pulp using traditional tools, wash it repeatedly to remove toxins that could make the entire family sick. Then process it through multiple stages that transform raw plant matter into flour that can last for months without refrigeration. The process takes days of coordinated work involving multiple family members, each with specialized knowledge about different stages. Choosing which palms to harvest requires understanding growth cycles, seasonal variations, and sustainable management practices that ensure future harvests. The washing techniques must remove all traces of naturally occurring toxins while preserving nutritional content and flavor. Getting it wrong can result in anything from stomach problems to serious poisoning. Then there's the protein situation, which revolves around pigs in ways that make perfect sense once you understand the system. Pigs aren't just food, they're currency, status symbols, and central characters in every major life event. A traditional Papuan feast can involve roasting an entire pig in an underground oven called an earth pit. But deciding which pig to use requires negotiations that can take days and affect relationships between families for years. The pig roasting process itself represents a masterclass in traditional cooking techniques. The earth oven reaches temperatures that cook meat thoroughly while infusing it with smoky flavors from specific wood types chosen for their burning properties and cultural significance. Timing the cooking requires understanding soil conditions, fire management, and coordination between multiple families who contribute different elements to the feast. But pigs represent just one protein source in traditional diets that include various wild game, fish from mountain streams, and insects that provide essential nutrients during certain seasons. Traditional hunting techniques require intimate knowledge of animal behavior patterns, seasonal movements, and sustainable harvesting practices that maintain wildlife populations over generations. The coffee situation in Papua's highlands might surprise anyone who thinks they understand Indonesian coffee culture. Growing at elevations between 4,000 and 8,000 feet, Papuan coffee beans develop flavor profiles that specialty roasters around the world are starting to notice. The combination of volcanic soils, consistent temperatures, and traditional processing methods creates coffees with complex flavor notes that compete with the world's most expensive beans. But the coffee industry in Papua operates according to unique constraints that affect everything from cultivation to marketing. Many coffee gardens are located in remote villages accessible only by foot or helicopter, making transportation costs a significant factor in final pricing. Traditional processing methods that produce exceptional quality coffee require hand labor that increases production costs while creating employment in communities with few alternative income sources. The relationships between coffee growers and buyers often follow traditional trade patterns rather than modern commercial contracts. Trust relationships built over years of personal interaction determine pricing and quality standards in ways that international coffee buyers sometimes struggle to understand. A coffee farmer's reputation for honesty and quality can affect his family's trading relationships for generations, creating incentives for maintaining high standards that formal contracts can't replicate. Street food in Papuan towns reflects the cultural mixing that happens when traditional societies meet modern Indonesian influences while maintaining distinct local characteristics. You'll find vendors selling sweet potato chips prepared, using traditional cooking techniques next to Indonesian satay stands that adapt traditional recipes to local ingredients and tastes. The result is a food scene that exists nowhere else on Earth. Part Stone Age survival cuisine, part modern Indonesian street food culture, part international influences from aid workers and researchers who've lived in communities long enough to influence local tastes. Traditional preparations of sago and sweet potato combine with Indonesian spices and cooking techniques to create fusion dishes that reflect Papua's complex cultural evolution. But here's where things get interesting for outsiders trying to navigate Papuan food culture. Sharing meals carries social obligations that can last for years and extend to relationships between entire families. Accept someone's hospitality, and you've entered into a relationship that might require reciprocal generosity at some point in the future when your host faces emergencies or special occasions. Refuse food that's offered, and you might accidentally insult 3 generations of someone's family while violating hospitality customs that govern social relationships. Understanding these obligations requires grasping how traditional societies create social insurance systems through reciprocal relationships. When you accept a meal, you're not just consuming food. You're acknowledging membership in social networks that provide mutual support during emergencies, coordinate resource sharing during seasonal shortages, and maintain peace between groups that might otherwise compete for limited resources. The social dynamics around relationships and marriage in Papua operate according to rules so intricate that even Papuans spend years learning to navigate them properly. Bride price isn't just about paying for a wife. It's a complex negotiation that establishes relationships between entire extended families, and can involve obligations that span generations while creating alliances that affect everything from land use rights to trade partnerships. Traditional Papuan courtship involves elaborate displays of wealth, skill, and cultural knowledge that make modern dating apps look like child's play. A young man interested in marriage might spend years accumulating the pigs, shells, and other valuables needed to make a proper proposal. But the accumulation process requires demonstrating competence in traditional skills, building relationships with elders who can provide guidance and support, and proving his ability to manage complex social obligations responsibly. The negotiation process itself can take months as families evaluate not just the immediate exchange of goods, but the long-term implications of creating formal relationships between lineages. Considerations include territorial rights, ceremonial obligations, potential conflicts of interest, and the couple's ability to maintain cultural traditions while adapting to modern circumstances that their grandparents never faced. The role of women in these arrangements is more complex than outsiders typically understand. While men might initiate marriage proposals, women and their families hold significant power in accepting or rejecting offers based on evaluations that consider factors ranging from personal compatibility to political implications of joining particular lineages. Elder women often serve as matchmakers and negotiators, using their knowledge of family histories and clan relationships to arrange marriages that strengthen entire communities while respecting individual preferences. Modern influences are changing these patterns, especially in towns where young Papuans have access to education and outside cultural influences that offer alternative models for romantic relationships and family formation. But even educated, urban Papuans often find themselves navigating between traditional expectations and modern desires in ways that create unique challenges requiring creative solutions. Cross-cultural marriages between Papuans and outsiders face additional layers of complexity that can surprise people accustomed to more individualistic societies. Indonesian migrants, foreign aid workers, and the occasional adventurous expat who decides to stay long-term must learn to navigate not just language barriers, but entire systems of social obligation that don't exist in their home cultures. The dating scene in Papuan towns creates some genuinely amusing situations that reveal how cultural adaptation actually works in practice. You might find young people using social media to flirt and arrange dates, but still needing their family's approval for any serious relationship. Modern concepts of individual choice bump up against traditional systems where marriage affects entire extended families and requires negotiations between lineages with histories stretching back centuries. For expat men considering relationships in Papua, understanding cultural expectations becomes crucial for avoiding misunderstandings that could have serious social consequences affecting not just romantic relationships, but business dealings, travel permissions, and community acceptance. What seems like casual dating to an outsider might be interpreted as serious courtship intentions by local families, leading to situations that require diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity to resolve gracefully. The festival calendar in Papua reads like something from an anthropology textbook, but experiencing these events in person reveals layers of meaning that no academic study can capture adequately. The Balium Valley Festival, held annually in August, transforms the highland town of Wamena into a showcase of traditional cultures that most of the world forgot existed. But calling it a tourist event misses the deeper cultural functions these gatherings serve. What you're witnessing is the continuation of traditions that have governed highland life for thousands of years, while adapting to contemporary circumstances that require new forms of cultural expression. The mock battles between different tribes aren't performances designed for tourist consumption. They're ritual reenactments of actual conflicts that establish territorial boundaries, resolve historical grievances, and maintain military readiness through ceremonial displays that substitute for actual warfare. The preparation for these events reveals how deeply traditional culture still influences daily life throughout Papua's highland communities. Families spend months preparing costumes, weapons, and ceremonial items using techniques that haven't changed in centuries. Feathers from birds of paradise must be obtained through traditional hunting methods that require extensive knowledge of bird behavior and habitat preferences. Pig tusks are carved into specific shapes that communicate clan affiliations and social status through symbolic systems that outsiders can't interpret without years of cultural education. Traditional paints made from local minerals are prepared using techniques that transform raw materials into pigments through processes that combine chemistry with spiritual practices. Each color carries specific meanings related to clan identity, spiritual beliefs, and social roles that determine who can wear particular combinations during different ceremonies. Music and dance in Papuan culture serve functions that go far beyond entertainment, while preserving information systems that maintain cultural continuity across generations. Traditional songs preserve historical information, genealogies, and practical knowledge in societies that never developed written languages. When tribal elders perform certain chants, they're not just singing, they're reciting territorial boundaries, family relationships, and agricultural wisdom that keeps their communities functioning effectively. The sound of traditional Papuan music hits you in ways you don't expect, creating emotional responses that seem to bypass conscious analysis. Drums made from tree trunks and lizard skins create rhythms that seem to emerge from the jungle itself, while traditional flutes produce melodies that sound both haunting and oddly familiar. Combined with the visual spectacle of traditional dress and body paint, these performances create experiences that feel more like time travel than entertainment. Participating in traditional ceremonies as an outsider requires understanding protocols that can make diplomatic state dinners look casual by comparison. Who sits, where what gifts to bring, how to show respect without accidentally violating cultural taboos that could offend entire communities and affect relationships for years. Getting it wrong can have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate social embarrassment. But when you get it right, these experiences provide access to cultural knowledge that most of the world will never see, while offering insights into human social organization that remain relevant even in technological societies. Watching master craftsmen create traditional weapons using techniques passed down through oral tradition, or observing the complex negotiations involved in organizing intertribal ceremonies, offers perspectives on human cooperation and cultural transmission that formal education rarely provides. The seasonal ceremony calendar coordinates with agricultural cycles, astronomical events, and social obligations in ways that maintain community cohesion while adapting to changing circumstances. Understanding this calendar requires knowledge of multiple overlapping systems that govern everything from planting schedules to marriage arrangements, creating complexity that challenges even anthropologists who spend decades studying particular communities. Now, let's talk numbers, because this is where Papua gets really interesting for budget-conscious adventurers seeking experiences that money can't buy in more developed destinations. Living on $500 a month in Papua isn't just possible. With the right approach, cultural sensitivity, and willingness to adapt to local conditions, it can actually provide a better quality of life than spending twice that amount in most Indonesian cities. The key is understanding how Papua's dual economy works and learning to navigate between cash-based transactions and traditional exchange systems that operate according to different principles. In traditional villages, cash money plays a smaller role than in most of the modern world, creating opportunities for creative approaches to meeting basic needs through participation in local social and economic systems. Housing represents the largest potential expense category, but also offers the greatest opportunities for creative solutions that reduce costs while enhancing cultural experiences. In traditional villages, accommodation might be provided through family connections or community obligations that function as social insurance systems rather than commercial transactions. Outsiders who invest time in building genuine relationships and demonstrating respect for local customs sometimes find themselves welcomed into housing arrangements that provide security and cultural access at costs far below commercial rates. Even in towns where you need cash for everything, Papua's cost structure creates opportunities for budget management that don't exist in more developed regions. A basic room in a local guest house might cost $20 to $30 per month, providing accommodation that meets essential needs while offering opportunities for daily interaction with local communities. These arrangements often include informal meals and social activities that enhance cultural understanding while reducing food costs. Rice, vegetables, and other staples cost less than in Jakarta or Bali, partly because local agriculture supplements imported goods while traditional food systems provide alternatives to commercial food purchases. Learning to appreciate and participate in traditional food systems can significantly reduce living costs while providing nutrition that's often superior to processed alternatives available in urban areas. The biggest expense category is usually transportation, because getting around Papua requires planes, boats, or extremely patient overland travel through terrain that challenges even experienced adventurers. A flight from Jayapura to Wamena costs around $60, which is cheap by international standards, but represents a significant portion of a $500 monthly budget that must cover all living expenses including emergencies and unexpected costs. But transportation costs create opportunities for cultural experiences that money can't buy in more developed destinations. Learning to travel by traditional methods, walking along ancient trails, traveling by canoe on rivers that serve as highways for local communities, or participating in community transportation arrangements, provides access to experiences and relationships that commercial tourism never offers while reducing costs to levels that fit strict budget constraints. Internet connectivity exists in towns but costs more and works less reliably than in Western Indonesia, while providing access that enables remote work opportunities for people with appropriate skills. A decent internet package might run $15 to $20 per month, assuming the infrastructure cooperates and weather conditions permit reliable connectivity. Phone service is similarly patchy and expensive, especially for international communication, making internet-based communication essential for maintaining outside connections. Healthcare represents the biggest wild card in any Papua budget planning, creating risks that require careful preparation and realistic expectations about available services. Basic medical care is available in towns, but serious conditions might require evacuation to Java or even overseas treatment that can cost thousands of dollars even with insurance coverage. Travel insurance becomes essential rather than optional, and even basic insurance can cost $50 to $100 per month depending on coverage levels and pre-existing conditions. The expat community in Papua consists mainly of aid workers, missionaries, researchers, and the occasional adventurer who got hooked on the culture and decided to stay longer than originally planned. These communities provide support networks that can make the difference between thriving and merely surviving on a tight budget, while offering access to knowledge about local conditions that takes years to develop independently. Understanding how to access and contribute to these support networks requires cultural sensitivity and genuine interest in local communities rather than just personal convenience. Successful long-term expats generally invest significant time and effort in learning local languages, understanding cultural protocols, and building relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than just convenience. Indonesian language skills become crucial for managing daily expenses and navigating bureaucratic requirements, because English is rarely spoken outside tourist-oriented businesses that may not exist in remote areas. Learning basic Bahasa Indonesia can save money on everything from accommodation to food, while opening access to information and opportunities that remain closed to obvious foreigners who can't communicate effectively in local languages. But language learning in Papua requires understanding that Indonesian serves as a lingua franca between communities that speak dozens of distinct local languages, creating communication situations that require flexibility and cultural awareness beyond simple vocabulary acquisition. Many Papuans speak Indonesian as a second or third language, leading to communication styles that blend Indonesian with local language patterns in ways that formal language instruction does not cover. Getting around Papua requires rethinking everything you think you know about transportation, while accepting that mobility involves challenges that do not exist in more developed regions. Roads exist mainly in theory, connecting towns that might be hundreds of miles apart through jungle terrain that swallows vehicles whole during the rainy season, when bridges wash out and landslides block routes for weeks or months at a time. Most practical transportation happens by small aircraft that operate more like bush pilot services than commercial airlines, with schedules that serve as optimistic suggestions rather than reliable commitments. Planes are small, passenger loads are limited, and weather delays can strand passengers for days in remote airstrips where accommodation and food services may not exist. But these flights provide access to places that would take weeks to reach overland, assuming you could find a route at all through terrain that challenges even experienced jungle trekkers. The flight network connecting Papuan towns operates according to economic principles that prioritize essential services over passenger convenience, creating situations where flights might be canceled for days due to weather conditions, mechanical problems, or insufficient passenger loads to justify fuel costs. Understanding this system requires patience and flexibility that most travelers never develop, but also creates opportunities for authentic cultural experiences during unexpected delays. River transportation opens up areas that even planes can't reach, but it comes with its own challenges that require local knowledge and realistic risk assessment. Crocodiles are a real concern in lowland rivers, particularly during certain seasons when water levels and feeding patterns create dangerous conditions for inexperienced travelers. Fast-flowing mountain streams can turn deadly without warning when weather changes upstream, create flash floods that sweep away everything in their path. Navigation requires local knowledge that outsiders simply don't possess, including understanding of seasonal water level changes, weather pattern recognition, and traditional protocols for river travel that maintain safety while respecting territorial boundaries between communities. Traveling by boat means accepting that your schedule depends entirely on water levels, weather conditions, and the availability of experienced guides who understand both practical and cultural requirements for safe river travel. Walking remains the most reliable form of transportation for accessing traditional villages and remote areas, where modern transportation infrastructure doesn't exist and may never be developed due to environmental constraints and cultural preferences. But don't underestimate what this involves. Trails might cross mountain passes at 10,000 feet elevation, where altitude sickness affects unprepared travelers ford rivers that can rise 20 feet during storms, or traverse jungle terrain, where getting lost can quickly become life-threatening for people without traditional navigation skills. The lifestyle pace in Papua varies dramatically depending on location and cultural context in ways that challenge assumptions about time management and productivity that govern modern urban life. Traditional villages operate according to agricultural and ceremonial cycles that have nothing to do with modern concepts of schedules or deadlines, creating environments where work happens when it needs to happen, and social obligations take precedence over individual plans. This creates adjustment challenges for outsiders accustomed to structured schedules and predictable routines that enable planning and goal achievement according to modern productivity principles. Meetings might start hours late or be postponed for days due to traditional obligations that take priority over commercial appointments. Business transactions can involve lengthy social rituals that seem unrelated to the actual commercial exchange, but serve crucial functions in maintaining trust relationships that enable ongoing cooperation. Even simple tasks like buying supplies or arranging transportation require patience and flexibility that test most people's limits while providing opportunities to understand how traditional societies coordinate complex activities without modern organizational systems. What seems like inefficiency to outsiders often reflects sophisticated social coordination systems that prioritize relationship maintenance over short-term task completion. But the slower pace also creates opportunities for experiences that rushed modern life rarely allows, including time to actually observe and understand complex traditional practices that take years to master. Opportunities for genuine relationships with people whose life experiences differ radically from typical expat communities provide perspectives on human adaptability and cultural resilience that formal education rarely addresses. The communication challenges go beyond language barriers to include fundamental differences in how information is shared, and decisions are made within traditional societies that operate according to consensus-building processes rather than hierarchical authority structures. Traditional Papuan cultures rely heavily on extended discussion and consensus-building processes that can take days or weeks to resolve issues that modern bureaucracies would handle in minutes through executive decisions. Understanding and respecting these processes becomes essential for anyone hoping to work effectively in traditional communities while avoiding cultural conflicts that could affect relationships for years. What seems like indecisiveness to outsiders often reflects careful consideration of multiple perspectives and long-term consequences that hierarchical decision-making systems might overlook. Papua's natural attractions read like a fantasy adventure novel designed to test human limits while providing access to environments that remain largely unaffected by modern development. Starting with Raja Ampat, the Four Kings Marine Park that sits off Papua's western tip, this isn't just another pretty diving spot, it's the epicenter of global marine biodiversity, home to more fish species than anywhere else on Earth while maintaining coral reef systems that scientists consider crucial for understanding marine ecosystem resilience. The coral formations here grow in shapes and colors that look almost artificial, creating underwater landscapes that challenge preconceptions about natural beauty while supporting marine life diversity that attracts researchers from around the world. Manta rays the size of small aircraft glide through crystal-clear waters that reach visibility of over 100 feet, creating diving experiences that remain unmatched anywhere else on Earth. But getting to Raja Ampat requires serious planning and budget flexibility that goes beyond simple transportation costs. Live-aboard diving trips can cost hundreds of dollars per day, reflecting the remote location and infrastructure requirements for supporting diving operations in areas with no permanent facilities. Budget-conscious travelers might spend weeks arranging local boat transportation that can access the best sites while meeting safety requirements for open-ocean travel. The infrastructure here caters to high-end eco-tourists rather than backpackers, reflecting the costs involved in maintaining sustainable tourism operations in remote marine environments while protecting fragile ecosystems from damage caused by excessive visitor numbers. Finding affordable options requires creativity, local connections, and willingness to accept accommodation and transportation standards that differ significantly from commercial tourism facilities. Lawrence National Park covers an area larger than some countries and contains the complete ecosystem transition from tropical beaches to glacial peaks, creating opportunities to experience the full range of Papua's environmental diversity within a single protected area. This is where you can literally walk from sea level to snow in a few days' travel, passing through lowland swamps where crocodiles and exotic birds create wildlife viewing opportunities that exist nowhere else. Montane forests that harbor endemic species found only in Papua's mountains, alpine meadows that support unique plant communities adapted to high-altitude conditions, and finally reaching the glaciers of Puncak Jaya that provide the only tropical glacial environment accessible to civilian visitors. The biodiversity here includes species that exist nowhere else on Earth. From tiny endemic frogs that live only in specific altitude ranges to birds of paradise with plumage that looks hand-painted by artists working with colors that don't exist anywhere else in nature. The park's size and environmental diversity create opportunities for extended wilderness experiences that challenge physical and mental capabilities while providing access to pristine environments that few humans ever see. But accessing Lawrence requires expedition-level planning and preparation that goes far beyond typical backpacking or tourism activities. The park's remoteness means that rescue services may not be available in case of emergencies, while the environmental challenges require equipment and skills that most travelers don't possess. Weather conditions can change rapidly from tropical heat to near-freezing temperatures, creating hypothermia risks for unprepared visitors. The Balium Valley provides access to traditional highland cultures in settings that feel like natural amphitheaters carved by ancient geological forces specifically designed for human habitation. Sweet potato gardens climb impossibly steep hillsides using terracing techniques that prevent erosion, while maintaining soil fertility in mountain environments where conventional agriculture would fail within a few seasons. Traditional villages nestle in locations that offer defensive advantages dating back to times when intertribal warfare was a regular occurrence requiring strategic positioning for community survival. The architecture reflects both practical requirements for mountain living and cultural preferences that prioritize community cooperation over individual privacy, creating settlement patterns that facilitate social coordination, while providing protection from both environmental hazards and potential conflicts. Trekking here means following trails used by traditional traders for centuries, crossing rope bridges that span gorges hundreds of feet deep while carrying loads that would challenge modern athletes. The trail system connects communities separated by terrain that would require roads costing millions of dollars per mile to construct, demonstrating how traditional societies developed transportation networks that remain more practical than modern alternatives in challenging environments. But trekking in the Bali Valley requires understanding cultural protocols that govern travel through territories controlled by different tribal groups, each with specific customs and territorial boundaries that must be respected to avoid conflicts that could affect relationships between communities for generations. What seems like simple hiking to outsiders involves navigation through complex political and cultural landscapes that require local guidance and cultural sensitivity. Birdwatching in Papua attracts serious enthusiasts from around the world who come seeking species that exist nowhere else, while supporting conservation efforts that protect habitat for endemic species threatened by development pressures. Birds of Paradise perform mating displays that combine acrobatics, music, and visual artistry in ways that make professional entertainment look amateurish, creating wildlife viewing experiences that justify the significant time and expense required to access remote viewing locations. But finding and observing these birds requires guides with traditional knowledge passed down through generations, patience for multi-day treks through difficult terrain that challenges physical fitness and mental resilience, and timing that aligns with natural breeding cycles that can't be predicted or controlled by tourism schedules. The best viewing opportunities often occur during weather conditions that make travel dangerous or impossible, creating situations where successful birdwatching requires accepting significant risks and uncertainties. The photography opportunities are world-class, but they come with challenges that test both technical skills and cultural sensitivity in ways that can make or break relationships with local communities. Traditional cultures have complex rules about photography that require understanding and respect, with some ceremonies being completely off-limits to cameras, while others allow photography only with specific permissions and protocols that must be negotiated in advance. Getting the shots that make Papua photography famous requires understanding both the technical challenges of shooting in extreme environments and the cultural context that determines what subjects are appropriate to photograph. Equipment must withstand humidity, temperature extremes, and transportation challenges that would destroy typical consumer cameras, while photographers must develop relationships with local communities that provide access to authentic cultural expressions rather than staged performances. Let's address the elephant in the room. Papua isn't exactly what you'd call a safe destination by international standards, creating risks that require serious preparation and realistic expectations about emergency services and medical care availability. The combination of limited infrastructure, challenging terrain, tropical diseases, and occasional political tensions creates risk levels that exceed most travelers' experience and preparation. Healthcare facilities outside major towns range from basic to non-existent, creating situations where minor injuries or illnesses can become life-threatening emergencies due to lack of appropriate treatment facilities. A broken bone or serious illness in a remote village might require evacuation by helicopter to facilities hundreds of miles away, assuming weather permits flying and helicopters are available when needed. The evacuation process itself can take days to arrange and cost thousands of dollars even with insurance coverage. Tropical diseases including malaria, dengue fever, and various parasitic infections are endemic in many areas, making preventive measures and medical preparations essential rather than optional for safe travel. But prevention requires understanding disease transmission patterns that vary seasonally and geographically in ways that simple guidebook advice does not cover adequately. Malaria prevention alone requires understanding that drug resistance patterns vary between regions, making prophylaxis recommendations that work in one area potentially ineffective in another. Dengue fever has no preventive medication, making mosquito control the only effective prevention strategy. But controlling mosquito exposure in jungle environments requires techniques and equipment that most travelers don't understand or carry. The political situation in Papua remains sensitive, with ongoing tensions between Indonesian authorities and various independence movements that can affect travel safety in ways that change rapidly without warning. While most areas are safe for travelers who follow local guidance and avoid sensitive topics, the situation can change quickly in ways that affect transportation, communication, and access to certain regions. Understanding the political context requires recognizing that many Papuans have complex relationships with Indonesian authority that affect how they interact with outsiders, particularly those who might be perceived as having connections to Indonesian government or military forces. Avoiding political discussions and maintaining neutrality becomes essential for maintaining good relationships and avoiding situations that could escalate unexpectedly. Crime in Papuan towns is generally petty theft and opportunistic rather than violent. But the isolation of many locations means that getting help when things go wrong can take time that might not be available during emergencies. Police presence in remote areas is minimal, and communication with outside authorities might be impossible during emergencies when satellite phones don't work and internet connectivity fails. But crime risks are often lower in traditional villages where social control systems make theft and violence rare, while community support systems provide security that doesn't exist in urban areas. Understanding how to access and respect these traditional security systems becomes more important than conventional security precautions that assume modern police and emergency services. Natural hazards include everything from flash floods and landslides to venomous snakes and aggressive wildlife that can create life-threatening situations for unprepared travelers. The terrain itself poses significant risks with steep mountain trails that become deadly during wet weather, unstable river crossings that can wash away bridges or fords without warning, and jungle conditions that can disorient even experienced outdoors enthusiasts within hours of leaving marked trails. But Papua's residents have developed sophisticated systems for managing these risks that outsiders can learn to navigate with proper preparation and local guidance. Traditional knowledge includes detailed understanding of weather patterns, seasonal risks, and emergency procedures that have kept communities safe for generations in environments that would challenge modern emergency services. Getting legal permission to visit Papua involves navigating Indonesian bureaucracy that operates according to rules that change frequently and aren't always clearly communicated to potential visitors, creating situations where legal requirements may be different from what guidebooks or online sources indicate. Tourist visas work for basic travel to accessible areas, but extended stays, research activities, or work in certain areas requires permits that can take months to obtain and might be denied without clear explanation or appeal processes. The permit requirements reflect both genuine security concerns and political sensitivities around foreign access to traditional communities and resource-rich areas. The Surat Jalan system requires additional permits for traveling to certain remote areas, ostensibly for visitor safety, but also reflecting political sensitivities around foreign access to regions where Indonesian government control remains tenuous. These permits must be obtained from district authorities and specify exact travel routes and timeframes, making spontaneous itinerary changes impossible and requiring detailed advance planning that may not account for weather delays or other unforeseen circumstances. Understanding the permit system requires recognizing that requirements may vary between different local authorities and can change based on current political conditions or security concerns that are not always communicated clearly to visitors. Working with local contacts who understand current requirements becomes essential for avoiding legal problems that could result in deportation or other serious consequences. Cultural protocols for interacting with traditional communities are not written down anywhere, but violating them can have serious social consequences that affect not just individual relationships, but broader community attitudes toward outsiders. Understanding appropriate behavior requires guidance from people who understand both traditional expectations and how to explain them to outsiders in ways that prevent misunderstandings. These protocols cover everything from appropriate clothing and behavior during ceremonies to gift-giving customs that can create long-term social obligations if not handled properly. What seems like simple courtesy to outsiders might carry meanings and implications that affect relationships between entire families for generations. As our helicopter lifts off from the Bali Valley for the return flight to Jayapura, the landscape below transforms into an abstract painting of green valleys, silver rivers, and distant peaks that disappear into clouds that seem to hold secrets about human possibilities that most of the modern world has forgotten. This is Papua, a place that challenges everything you think you know about modern life, traditional culture, and the possibilities for human existence in the 21st century. Living here on $500 a month isn't just about budget management or adventure tourism. It's about accepting that survival and thriving require learning systems of knowledge that most of the modern world has forgotten while developing skills and relationships that can't be purchased or acquired through formal education. The tribal rules that seem unbelievable to outsiders are not quirky cultural remnants or tourist attractions. They're sophisticated social technologies that have enabled human communities to thrive in one of Earth's most challenging environments for thousands of years, while maintaining cultural integrity and environmental sustainability. The young Papuans scrolling through social media while their grandparents discuss bride prices in pig tusks are not caught between two worlds or struggling with cultural confusion. They're creating a new synthesis that honors traditional wisdom while engaging with global opportunities and challenges. Their challenge isn't choosing between old and new, traditional and modern, but finding ways to maintain cultural integrity while accessing the benefits of modern technology and education without losing the knowledge systems that have sustained their communities for millennia. For the handful of outsiders who choose to make Papua home, whether temporarily or permanently, the experience offers something increasingly rare in our connected world: genuine cultural immersion in societies that operate according to fundamentally different assumptions about human relationships, economic systems, and social organization. Learning to navigate these differences successfully requires more than language skills or cultural sensitivity. It demands a willingness to question basic assumptions about how human societies should function while developing new approaches to cooperation and community that synthesize traditional wisdom with contemporary challenges. The natural beauty here serves as more than just a scenic backdrop or tourist attraction. It's the foundation for understanding why traditional Papuan cultures developed such sophisticated systems for managing relationships between human communities and their environment. When your survival depends on reading subtle changes in weather patterns, understanding complex ecological relationships, and maintaining social cooperation without modern institutional support, every aspect of culture becomes functional rather than merely decorative or traditional. The $500 monthly budget challenge reveals how much of modern expense comes from systems we take for granted rather than actual necessities for comfortable and fulfilling life. Housing, food, transportation, and communication all cost less when you're willing to accept lower levels of convenience and predictability while investing time and effort in building relationships and developing skills that reduce dependence on commercial services. But the trade-offs involve more than just comfort or convenience. They require developing skills, relationships, and cultural knowledge that most modern people never need, while accepting risks and uncertainties that modern infrastructure is designed to eliminate. Success requires understanding that the reduced costs come with increased responsibilities for personal security, health management, and social coordination that can't be outsourced to professional services or government agencies. Papua's isolation from mainstream Indonesian culture creates opportunities and challenges that don't exist elsewhere in Indonesia or most other places accessible to international travelers. The distance from Jakarta's political center provides space for traditional practices to continue with less interference while limiting access to government services, economic opportunities, and modern infrastructure that most Indonesians consider basic necessities. This isolation creates a laboratory for understanding how traditional and modern systems can coexist and adapt to each other while maintaining essential functions that serve human needs. The results aren't always successful or comfortable, but they provide insights into human adaptability and cultural resilience that remain relevant even for people who never plan to live in traditional societies. The tribal rules that govern traditional Papuan societies represent solutions to social coordination problems that modern institutions handle through laws, markets, and bureaucracies, but with different assumptions about individual rights, collective responsibilities, and the relationship between human communities and their environment. Understanding how these traditional systems work provides insights into alternative approaches to organizing human cooperation that remain relevant even in technological societies facing environmental and social challenges that existing institutions struggle to address. For travelers considering Papua as a destination, the experience offers something increasingly rare: genuine adventure in places where outcomes can't be guaranteed and where success depends on skills, relationships, and adaptability, rather than just financial resources or guidebook knowledge. But this isn't adventure tourism packaged for consumption or extreme sports designed for adrenaline rushes. It's engagement with living cultures that continue to face real challenges and opportunities in their ongoing adaptation to modern circumstances. The morning mist rising from the jungle canopy as we fly back toward civilization carries with it the realization that places like Papua won't exist forever in their current form. Climate change, political pressures, economic development, and generational change will continue transforming even the most remote communities in ways that may preserve some aspects of traditional culture while fundamentally altering others. The opportunity to witness and participate in these ancient ways of life represents a window into human possibilities that is closing faster than most people realize, not because traditional cultures are disappearing, but because they're adapting and changing in ways that create new syntheses rather than preserving unchanged traditions. Understanding and documenting these changes provides insights into human adaptability that remain relevant for addressing contemporary challenges that require new approaches to cooperation, sustainability, and social organization. Comment below if you'd be willing to trade your current lifestyle for $500 a month and the chance to learn survival skills that have kept human communities thriving for thousands of years, while contributing to cultural and environmental conservation efforts that preserve knowledge systems and natural environments for future generations. Because Papua isn't just offering budget travel or cultural tourism, it's providing access to knowledge systems that most of the modern world has forgotten in landscapes that still operate according to rules older than civilization itself, with people who continue creating solutions to human challenges that remain relevant even in technological societies. The helicopter disappears over distant mountains, leaving behind a silence that reminds you this isn't just another travel destination or cultural experience. It's a glimpse into human possibilities that continue to exist at the edges of our rapidly homogenizing world, offering lessons about adaptation, cooperation, and sustainability that remain essential for addressing the challenges facing all human communities in an uncertain future.